Welcome, dear listener. We're delighted you chose to join us in this realm of horror. The whispers and shadows around you were designed to unsettle. Prepare to descend into darkness as we guide you through chilling tales. You join a growing community of the brave. If you dare. Story 1. I brought Maria home after our date, not expecting anything. She asked, "Can we go back to your place and watch a movie?" To which I replied, "Sure. I think we can definitely find something." Maria was gorgeous, with long blonde hair, big green eyes, and full, naturally red lips. I helped her into an Uber and hopped in the other side. We started making out in the back seat, and before we knew it, we were at my apartment. So there we were at my apartment, cuddled together under a large throw blanket, our fingers intertwined. Every time a jump scare happened during insidious Maria's fingers would tighten, and she'd squeeze my hand. She'd hold her breath if she thought something bad was going to happen. I paused the movie and told her I had to go to the washroom. Maria said she was going to sneak outside for a quick smoke. When you come back in, if you want anything out of the kitchen, help yourself, I said, as we went separate ways. I heard the front door open and the screen door slam behind her. Heading down my hallway towards the bathroom, I thought I heard a scream, but assumed maybe the movie hadn't paused, shutting the door behind me. I beep out the 5 beers ID finished over dinner. I was washing my hands when I heard the screen door slam again. I opened the bathroom door and yelled down the hall, ILLB, right out. No reply, but I assumed she'd gone through the living room into the kitchen. After I finished tidying myself up in the mirror, I walked back into the living room and sat back down on the couch. Insidious was still paused in the same spot ID left it. The kitchen light was off, so I got up to check on Maria and to grab myself some chips. No one was in the kitchen, so I headed for the front door. Maria wasn't there either. I opened the screen door and had a look around. Laying on the step was Maria S. lit cigarette, still smoking and burning. I picked it up and took a long drag off her John Player's Rich and stood on my front stoop looking up and down my street for any sign of her. I could be sworn this date was going better than that. And didn't he think there was any reason she would be just taken off? I flicked the cigarette out into the street and turned and headed back inside, sitting back down on the couch. I turned off the movie and put on sports highlights. I grabbed my phone and texted Maria, "Where do you go?" I waited for a reply, but none ever came. I ate some of the chips ID grabbed from the kitchen and watched the Raptors clips, then shut my TV off and got ready for bed, while I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth. I again thought I heard a noise, but this time it was a loud bump coming from the front door. I dropped my toothbrush in the sink and ran for the door, hoping it was Maria. There, standing at my front door in my entryway, was a man, the size I'd never seen before. He had to be pushing 7 feet tall and weighed probably close to 400 pounds. His hands were covered in what I could only assume was dirt and dried blood. His long black hair hanging out from under his hood, covering his face. Over his labored breathing, I could hear giggling coming from behind him, peeking out from around the man. I could see Maria's face, except she didn't look like Maria anymore. Her blonde hair was gone, and in its place was a short pixie cut of dark brown hair. Her green eyes were bloodshot and red, and she had blood running from her nose and a white powder on her lips. That's him. He got about $200 in his wallet. And Beep knows whatever else in the house Maria said as the giant started coming towards me. Listen, man, I don't want any trouble. You want my money, take it. You want anything else, take it. It's all Beep, in short, I stated, as the lumbering monster continued his path. He was practically drooling, and his hands were shaking to the point I knew it was time to run. I made my way down the hallway back to my bathroom, slamming the door behind me and hitting the lock. I pressed my back against the door, knowing I wasn't going to be able to keep him out very long. Each time he struck the door, I thought the whole wall would be coming down on top of me over the smashing of my bathroom door. I could hear Maria going through my bedroom drawers. Open the Beep door. Beep, he screamed every time he hit. I reached forward and opened the cupboard under my sink, seeing the bottles of cleaning supplies. I looked for what could do the most damage. A squirt bottle of Mr. Clean Toilet and Bathroom Cleaner was what I chose, grabbing the bottle and removing the lid. I stood up and stepped back from the door in between one of his hits. The next smash against the door busted it off the hinges, and he fell forward onto the floor. Hey, I yelled as he looked up at me. I poured the whole bottle onto his face. He screamed an ungodly scream that made my ears ring. I looked up to see Maria standing in the bathroom door. What did you do? She asked, her voice cracking and angry. I held the bottle over the giant's head and told her to get back. You got 2 choices, Beep. Either get out or call 911. 'Cause you're whatever the BP is going to be blind or worse for what I just poured in his face. I used my best threatening voice. She took choice 1 and ran. I ran to the living room and grabbed my cell, dialing 911. and requesting cops and an ambulance. It was 10 minutes later that the cops arrived. The man on my bathroom floor had stopped breathing 4 minutes before that. After an investigation, I was told that the big guy Sean McCoy and his wife Maria McCoy had been using this scam to rob and severely injure single guys like myself for years. Sean died as a result of the Mr. Clean Eye poured in his face, and a heart attack caused by the coke he'd taken before getting into my house. Maria, on the other hand, was still at large. I moved a month later, as I wasn't comfortable knowing she knew where I lived. Every so often I see a blonde woman who reminds me of her. My therapist says that will go away over time, and I just need to stick with the therapy. I think it's the nightmares that are the worst. Every time I hear a loud bang, I can literally feel the pressure in my back build as my mind goes back to holding that door. On a side note, I met a wonderful woman in my PTSD group. Her name is Mandy, and she's gorgeous. Story 2. I hate it here, granted. I deserve a time currently locked down behind massive concrete walls and solid steel doors in a maximum security penitentiary. I was locked up what feels like a lifetime ago now. I earned it. I did. Every second I wrought here is justice. But that doesn't change the fact that I hated it is cold here. I have a single concrete cot and toilet. My clothes itch and are too thin to keep any chills out. The walls are a gray with a sickly green tint due to the dull, swamp-like tile that sends a grossly colored glow into the room, reflecting the buzzing fluorescent light above me. The door is thick and unmoving. They paint it the same shade of sickly green as the floor. I assume it is lead-based to save on cost. I have no roommate, as many Don T who are perceived as extreme risks. Thankfully, I can still have time outside and shower without being entirely supervised. More than I can say for many in here. My only commodity is my toilet paper and my journal. I earned the journal through much work and good behavior. The pencil I write with is dull and has no eraser, like that a golfer would use to keep scorecards. I am allowed 4 hours per day with it. Between breakfast and lunch, I receive the journal and pencil with my meal and return it in kind if the pencil has any pieces missing or there are any extensive tears in the pages. Then I will lose it for the following day. So I comply. I comply so I may have some mild comfort in this concrete cage in which I slowly die again. I definitely earned it. But that doesn't change the fact that prison is B-pie. Earned my place here. Because I killed people, I killed many people, I killed 20 people to be exact, this is the first time I've actually written a tie beat the Cannibal S number, which for some reason gave me a sense of accomplishment. However, what gave me more satisfaction was the evenness of the number 22, 0.202, 022 to 2, 0.020, even, and smooth my compulsion made it this way. 21 would have made getting arrested a living beep. 15 would have been okay. But 20 was much cleaner. Increments of 5. Always increments of 5. Sometimes, during a shopping trip, I would grab a stick of gum so as to have 20 or 10 or 30 items even. However, in the case of the killings, it was much more intense. The problem was the itch I felt in between. It was a gnawing pain in my mind from 1 to 4 and 6 to 9. The itch was not as bad during 5S, but 10S were the best. However, that number will eventually attract attention. That number is partially what got me caught. But I had to scratch the itch, so to speak. It made me empathize with vampires. In the old horror stories, the sensation of aching thirst that cannot be quenched. It is nightmarish. The same remained true for my age. 40. I finished at 40, which made me content. I hated not having an even age. I could force down the bad feelings. My age ended in 5s, or even numbers. But I always had bad years with 1s, 3s, 7, S, and 9s. I digress. I understand it is abnormal behavior, but it is a compulsion. I have it manageable, so that most would never notice in a day-to-day routine. I have to reminisce on these pages, because I have no way of going back. It started many years ago, and the urge only grew from there. The first time I killed was interesting. I should have felt the need to immediately beep again, as I did in later years. But I didn't. They say mental illness worsens with age. I guess that is what kept me from acting again so soon. But I am not sure. The first time I killed was pretty lackluster. I was walking home from school through the woods, where very few kids were bold enough to cross. While walking, I stumbled upon a man. He was clearly injured, and even at the age of 12, I knew he had little time left. He sat, holding his side, panting in labored breaths. He didn't see me yet. From my vantage point, I could see a long, white bone jutting from his leg, which tells me the pain from what his ribs were doing was worse than that of a broken leg. That, or he was just in shock. Far above this section of woods was a road, and from what I could see, a vehicle burst through railing. The wrecked vehicle, a '69 Chevy C20 truck, lay decimated some 40 feet below the roadway in the brush and rocks. I remember this truck because I wound up purchasing one many years later in a secret nostalgia for myself. Either way, the driver had pulled himself from the wreckage and crawled in agony upwards of 50 feet to the nearest tree, where his strength was slowly failing him. I remember seeing a large shard of metal which had been ripped from the side of the truck, and picking it up, I walked slowly to the man, who reached pitifully towards me for help. I slowly shoved the sharp edge of the metal into the man's throat and watched as blood began to spurt from the wound and his mouth. He gargled like a drowning sow on his own blood, and after a time he ceased all movement. Forever it was a rush of which I cannot explain. The excitement of ending a human life is next to none. I was content for a fleeting moment. I stared at the body for some time before taking a bloody shred of his pant leg that was hanging by a thread. I just wanted to have a keepsake. That was my first beep. I was never caught, nor even suspected. Growing up in the mountains of the South allowed much privacy, and it allowed me to get away with beep. As time grew, so did the feeling of power and accomplishment. I felt like beep no one even knew I was the way I was. I would never be a suspect, because I knew to hide. I hid well, because I knew how to hide. From the time I was a boy, I knew how to blend in. Sometimes it was a challenge because of my appearance, but I learned a simple skill. How to hide in plain sight. I was able to work hard in the background. I made good grades and maintained very few close friendships throughout school, so no one would discover anything about me. However, I made sure everyone had a nice thing to say about me. Carrying groceries, helping kids with studying, always using manners. I graduated in the upper ranks of my class, and soon attended the local college. After I earned a degree in business, I worked hard where I could and raised enough money to buy my own rig. I worked by riding the highways as a trucker for years, and eventually bought 2 more rigs. By 35, I was a respectable business owner in my old town, with a dispatch and a few drivers. I obviously still drove, even as the owner, because it kept me close to my only real passion. I hid well in plain sight, because white people love a beep. In a town of 90% white and 10% other, I learned to blend despite being a minority. Learn to talk like them, learn to walk like them, and you can manipulate them into whatever you want. I hate them, not white people, all people. My mother died shortly after I graduated high school from heart failure, and I felt liberated, for I held her opinion highly. Her opinions often kept me in line and respectable. When she died, I was free to pursue my own interests. My father while a good man in his own right, never held much weight in my actions. So I walked the path I chose for myself, despite what his feelings may be either way. I dwindled for some time after the first beep. The urge slowly grew. By high school, I kept my eyes peeled for another opportunity to beep out a life. Finally, that day came the second time. I murdered was equally uninspiring. I found myself at a graduation party, and the whole senior class was drinking heavily. All except me, that is. We were at the home of a wealthier student who had maintained a spotless record through both junior high and high school, and wanted to go out in a way where she could get out of her proverbial box. I learned two things that evening. The first, that a well-mannered, well-educated young lady was no different than anyone else in regards to having a darker side. She wanted to be remembered for a party, not her good grades, not her generous deeds, not her modest manner of dress, but a party. Everyone has a dark side in some way. This was the first thing I learned. The second was that if everyone is beep and dancing on the roof, you could bump a certain young lady discreetly enough to send her 3 stories down into the concrete and make it look like an accident. She landed with a smack that can only be replicated in my dreams. This was the first time I was aroused by a killing. I am not sure why. She was in a 2-piece, and her skin was pale and smooth. Her deep brown hair flowed past her shoulders, and the look of utter confusion and terror in the face of innocence was priceless. Blood pooled from her head and seeped into her nearby swimming pool. I fancied her, you could say, but only because she represented something that does not exist. Human innocence. When her skull cracked hard against the pavement, I was instantly excited. I had to sneak away to handle it and steal a memento from the girl's room. Meanwhile, the remaining partygoers descended into madness, trying to repair a situation that was far beyond broken. The chaos I caused that night again resurfaced my deep sense of accomplishment that only comes from death. This was the second time I killed. 18 years of age. By the time I hit my stride, I stood at 6'2", at 260 pounds. I had always enjoyed lifting weights and working towards my overall health. A beep predator is a bad predator. I maintained this level of fitness for most of my adult life. I had to, in order to pursue my passion, of course. Things would have a way of catching up with me. I was incarcerated with an unfortunate mountain of evidence. I wouldn't say I covered every base perfectly to ensure not getting caught, but I felt like I was careful enough. I guess not. In hindsight, I remember the day I was arrested. I had turned 40 the month prior and was on the road delivering a shipment of plywood. I was behind the wheel of my rig in rural Alabama. I was taking a back road because I enjoy the scenery. And when you the boss, you can set your own schedule. At this point, I had killed 19 people, and the itch was present. I would have to rub the back of my neck when I thought about it. It needed to be scratched. I needed to take care of it. That S, when I saw her miles from any structure or any living person, was a broken down, baby blue Volkswagen Beetle. The emergency lights were flashing, and a woman was looking into her engine compartment. The height of my truck allowed Mai to scan both her car and the area surrounding us. It was tall, uncut grass and trees, covered in utter blackness due to the overcast night. There was no one for miles and miles. We could be alone together. I pulled in behind her with my low lights so as not to scare her. When I stepped out of the truck, I addressed her. "Pardon me, Ma M," I said calmly. "I know how to disarm. I have worked on my speaking voice for years in order to betray their security into my hands. Are you all right?" She stepped out from behind her hood, and I saw her in better light. She was a young Hispanic woman. Her clothes were tattered, but I think that was intentional. She had silky, dark hair to her shoulders and black librarian glasses. She was pretty, which was a bonus for me. Consider it like a dinner. You going to get your meal. But when it includes dessert, then it is all the better. I also knew she could complete this cycle. She could be the 20th, and I could rest. Best yet, she was petite, so there would be little fight. "I think the engine is shot," she said in a desperation that these dark woods certainly played well into. She just wanted to get out of danger. Little did she know, I can give you a ride. I own this company, so I can make the time. I didn't want to sound presumptuous, but I knew by making myself a manager, it would remove the creepy truck driver mentality. "I don't know. I promise," I edged in my best zippity-doo-dah voice. "I'll take you straight into town, and we can find you a phone. My wife would beep me if I let a young lady stay stranded in the woods. I wasn't married, but that is another way of disarming her. A spouse always makes a man less dangerous, or again, as she thought. "Okay," she said, with her fear betraying her skepticism. "Thank you. I'll get the door for you." As she walked to the passenger side, I held the door open for her. As she took her first step up, I grabbed her ankle and pulled her straight down with as much force as I could. Manage her jaw connected with the studded metal stairs full force. I know some teeth were broken by the crunch that emanated from her skull. She fell limp to the dirt. as I lifted her onto my shoulder. She didn't stir long enough for me to grab a large socket wrench from my rig. I could feel the warm blood from her mouth pouring down my shoulder. I carried her into the tall grass, just out of sight. We made love then. I had made love before to some, but this was special. She was the 20th. She would complete the need. Halfway through, she began to wake and struggle. From there, I had to act. I took the socket wrench and began to hit her. She struggled to scream due to her shattered jaw. I hit her in her pretty face, over and over, and 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 over and over. When I had finished on all fronts, I took her wallet from her jeans off beside us. Hannah, I believe her name was. I took her glasses as they fell off when her face collided with my truck, and avoided the wrath of the socket wrench. They had her name engraved inside the temple I drove. Leaving the scene entirely, I had to re-enter the highway some time later, and saw lights in my mirror. I had been stopped before, once even with a body in the back, so I was not worried. The officer walked to the side and called me out. "You Williams?" he asked with an unreadable demeanor. "Yes, sir," I answered coolly, holding my ID and paperwork for the truck and delivery. He then spoke into his radio. "Yeah, we found him. Officer, what as this ab?" I was cut short. "Sir, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." "Why?" I demanded. I was not about to be cuffed and restrained for no good reason. He then turned me violently to my truck and slapped cuffs around my wrists. From there, he sat me on the pavement and called for backup when other officers arrived. One finally noticed the blood on my back. They then found the glasses. They then found the poorly wiped down socket wrench. They then received word of a brutal mutilation. Several towns over they had stopped me initially because one of my drivers was caught with a brick of marijuana, and they wanted to stop all trucks from my dispatch to make sure we were legitimate. It would be funny if it weren't so infuriating. I was brought down on a technicality. My run lasted from 12 to 40. I was undetected for that entire time. I changed my mo. I killed strangers only. I was so careful. A technicality was the only thing that could have done this my simple home was turned about, until they found my treasure box. From there, it was easy to put me at every single beep, every homeless person stabbed to death in cities, every transient beep with their heads missing, every unsupervised child in crowded streets. I was linked to them all now. One may ask, why would you be so beep as to keep mementos? To that I would say I had to. It was my passion, and the only thing that gave me meaning. I had to keep something around. They were the only memories I could have of those times like I first wrote. I deserve to be in prison, but I don't regret in the slightest. What IV done the trial was grueling and irritating. Since I killed across state lines, there was arguments as to where to have my trial. But it became a federal issue, which only meant more bureaucracy. My lawyer explained many of the killings would be circumstantial at best. But just as many have my now connected DNA to the scene, and are going to be nearly impossible to deny, I decided to throw in the towel. The media was out for blood. The public was out for blood. And the jury was out for blood. I had my fill. So now it was time to pay the favor forward. There was no way to avoid a life sentence. So I may as well come clean and regale the tales of my exploits to a room of terrified jurors and family members, burning with hatred despite the difficulties of finding some evidence of murders. I was still convicted for 18 of the 20. However, I was punished for them, all regardless the day of sentencing. I stood still and stoic before the judge. I could feel the eyes of all those present attempting to sear me. But failing the judge looked down at me and rambled on about my cruelties and resentment for man. The entire time he droned, I stood with the thought that the death penalty was illegal in this state. It was utterly satisfying to know the uproarious crowds calling for my head when the law wouldn't allow it. I snapped out of it when he got to the sentence, seeing as how the death penalty is illegal in this state. I can only do the most with that in light. I hereby sentence you to 1,001 life sentences. He was being melodramatic. Not in history had there been such an absurd sentence. What's worse, the number was uneven, meaning the rest of my life I would have to say 1,001 when discussing my sentence. He knew this, my demeanor slightly shaken. I asked the judge, why 1,001? The courtroom was silent. The families, friends, and jury looked at me with contempt. But that didn't matter then. Even less now the judge leaned over his podium. He smiled with a smugness that still boils my blood, and he calmly replied, to torment you. That is how I got where I am now. I don't interact with the other inmates or the guards. I just mind my business as best I can. I don't like to think about my sentence because it makes me itch, similar to when you haven't paid a certain bill, but don't have the funds. It is a wincing mental discomfort. I write the rest of this in a testament to what happened yesterday in hopes it reaches someone on the outside. My day started normally. A loud bell rang and I stood to my feet. From there, my door opened and I walked to the shower facility. I tried to find myself at the end of the line so as to get the most time out of my cell. I also like my privacy. The inmates here are insufferable. They are uneducated criminals who would have no life outside of these walls. My fellow black inmates gave me beep for being crazy. Since African American serial killers are considered such an abnormality, the other races tended to stay to themselves. Minus a few Beep Brotherhood members casting the occasional slur my direction, I entered the shower as normal. But I felt an innate sense of dread that I don't know how to describe. I just felt unpleasant. I felt watched and alone at the same time. I felt completely hopeless and near despair. I quickly finished my shower and left the facility. The halls were quiet, and the stationary guard was not at his post in front of my cell. I was alone in this hallway suddenly. I felt a large hand grip my shoulder and order me forward. The next thing I knew, I was being escorted to the warden's office. I was somewhat stunned, but complied. I walked the tight enclosed halls until I reached the last room on the right. Inside was totally dark apart from a dim lamp illuminating a desk. The hand shoved me in and slammed the door behind me. I saw the silhouette of Warden, and he beckoned me to sit. I sat across from him in uncomfortable silence. He didn't move, and neither did I. I would force him to make the first move after. What felt like an eternity, he spoke up. Let us go over your file. His voice carried a mild southern accent sprinkled in. I did not respond. He gave no indication as to why. So I would bide my time from here. I will paraphrase what was said, as my memory can perfectly recreate the entire conversation. Count. 1 confessed, not convicted. Man falls off cliff, and you assist him in passing. You were 12, so it wasn't included in your final file, but it warrants mentioning. Count. 2 confessed, convicted. You confessed to shoving a young woman off a roof, and then robbing her home of a trophy. You were 18. Count. 3 confessed, convicted. Homeless man near your college. You stabbed him and cut out a tooth. You were 20. Count. 4 confessed, not convicted. You claim to have beep beep in Texas. The souvenir you took could not link you to the crime. And she had no family. You were 24, not convicted. But you know what you did counts 5 through. 9 confessed. Convicted on all counts. You killed 5 lot lizards before changing your mo. That was smart. They were all strangled, and you kept a lock of hair. Left them on the highway count. 10 confessed. Convicted. You took a lost 12-year-old and drowned him. You kept his retainer. You were doing well in life by this point. But beep still called. Didn't beep. Count. 11 confessed. Convicted. Ah, this one was Special Wasson T. That gas station employee who you stalked for a while. Followed her home and broke in. Took your time and did it right. She broke your perfect streak, and you were going to make her pay right. Kept her locket as a token of your affection count. 12 confessed. Convicted. You took a young man to from a local club in Missouri. Strangled him the moment the door was closed. Chopped him up and kept his teeth counts 13 through. 17 confessed. Convicted on all counts. The hitchhiker phase. Here it seems you just wanted to close the gap. You got sloppy. Left a lot of evidence behind. I guess, because they were vagrants, it wouldn't have mattered count. 18 confessed. Convicted. You killed a housewife in Florida. You were on vacation at them time. You spotted her and just had to do something, waiting until her husband left, and had yourself a time. Another beep and strangling. You took her blood-soaked necklace count. 19 confessed. Convicted. You saw a jogger one morning and followed in your truck. When you knew their routine, you waited in the bushes until he passed. You killed him with a hammer and took one of his shoes count. 20 confessed. Convicted. The one that brought you down. You couldn't resist her. You were too careless, too excited. Now you rehear. You took her glasses and bashing her head in and assaulting her. He took a deep breathe and his outline sat back. You know what they call you. He asked me incredulously. I was livid. He completely bastardized my work. I had done so much, and he swept over it like an obituary column. I glared at him in the dark before answering. The scavenger hunt killer. I hated that name. They donned me the scavenger hunt killer because my murders spanned so far, and I collected odd, disconnected items. Again, my works and efforts were reduced to a joke. It still makes me sick. The warden spoke up again. Are you sorry? I sat for a moment before responding. Would it matter? He chuckled in a deep, throaty laugh. No, he said, settling in. I guess it wouldn't. He continued. I don't get it really. You re a highly intelligent, healthy, and well-spoken man. Why on earth would you throw that away? I sat in angry silence. I refused to give this man the satisfaction of an answer. Do you believe in Beep? The warden asked. His tone now changed. I chewed my tongue before responding. No. Pity, he responded lackadaisically, as if my response didn't he really matter. That would make what I am about to tell you much better. I waited for him to continue. Your sentence is being commuted. I raised an eyebrow in disbelief. Really? Yes, he sat, still shadowed. But I knew he was smirking. What does that have to do with Beep? I know I should have had much more important questions to ask in that moment. But I was curious. I assumed he meant I should be thankful. Well, he said, his voice trailing, that would make this next part easier. You passed away this morning, son. Before I could respond, his hand tossed a few photos in front of me. It was me. I lay covered in blood on the shower floor. I had been stabbed from the looks of it. Yeah, the warden, or who I thought was the warden, spoke up. Some Beep fellow wanted to prove his might by stabbing a serial killer to death in the shower. Didn't he work, though? Since he was caught and will most likely be in solitary until it does irreparable damage. If that is some comfort. I stared at him. I stared at the photographs. I simple could not accept it. This is absurd. I felt insulted, and the prospect. I know it seems odd, but hear me out. He sat upright, ready to make his case. Do you know what the Universalists are? No, well, he continued, without missing a beat. Basically, it states that everyone gets into heaven, even if you aren't necessarily in their denomination. This is heaven. I was ready to laugh. This was a joke. No, see that S, the bad news, he continued. Catholics, Muslims, some Buddhists. See, they believe in a temporal plane, so they also sort of right. See, everyone does eventually move on. But before anyone can move on, they must resolve all their earthly obligations and judgments. Before I could remark, he caught his breath and explained further. You died this morning. You served one of your 1001 life sentences. Welcome to number 2. I stood up. This isn't funny. I am leaving. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, unable to use my body. My eyes felt like they were being pried towards the seat. Please, I heard the warden, though his voice was now much deeper, sinking my gut. Sit. I returned to my seat with a sensation that was new to me. Fear. Now, he continued, his voice returning to normal. You are beepnit beep dead. You just started another sentence. Everything will be back to normal when you leave. When I dismiss you, you will leave here and return to your bunk. Do you understand? I nodded, still stunned by what I then knew as truth. his voice, the unexplained dread I felt that morning I walked out of the warden's office that day, feeling a hopelessness I have never known. The prison was the same, but it wasn't Beep was lonelier, darker that feels like forever ago. I learned since then first, lifetime does not mean from the age you are incarcerated. I expected a 40-year life sentence, but after speaking with a few other inmates serving like myself, who I see sometimes sparingly, I learned that it varies somewhere from 80 to 120 years. It varies, but it is always at least 80. I guess the guards don't notice after a certain point. Also, I assume they don't register that we never seem to leave. Inexplicable, but that's what's happening second. Each go around changes you. The prisoners don't notice you. The others like you have fewer words. The guards seemed always outside of the line of sight, even when they would interact. They were like fleeting shadows I am cracking mentally. I will walk into the showers and see someone shaving, even speak with him at length. However, when I turn a corner or close a stall door, Beep be gone when I return next. I learned that suicide docentee work. I learned the same way every inmate in here like me does. I slit my wrists, and they just ached for a week. I swallowed bleach and had a miserable stomachache, but no death. I hung myself where I choked and flailed, fully conscious, for 8 straight hours, until a guard found me while bringing my breakfast. The following morning I learned that being murdered decreases time, but murdering adds it. So no one on life row attempts Beep here finally. Escaping isn't an option. We have runners sometimes. Men who just finished their first sentence. The guy just snapped. I guess he pulled maybe 60 years before dying in his sleep. He just panicked and ran. The snipers didn't even turn. He grabbed the fence and immediately fell to the ground. From there, he shook violently. He died right there of a heart attack. I saw him a week later. 3rd life sentence. Half crippled. I guess we get punished if we try to leave. I don't know if it's permanent. He was a wreck upon returning. It reminded me of the cats in my neighborhood as a boy. The first time you heard it, the animal twitches and becomes neurotic, but given enough time, it accepts its fate. The man now spends his days staring silently behind dead eyes at whatever light source is around you. This is limbo, where we remain trapped in the prison in which we were condemned until our body and soul have finished their sentences. To others, this is some kind of purgatory, where we are groomed for eternity in paradise. Either way, we are forced to remain, forced to live until we pay our dues. Never truly dying. I don't even know if time is the same now. But if you're reading this, I managed to successfully get these pages out. I have handful of plans, which I cannot record. I cannot risk and future attempts. Should this fail, I am leaving this journal for anyone who is a criminal or wants to become one. I have between 80,000 to equals 100,000 years left. I do not feel remorse, but I do wish I knew then what I know now. This is simply a warning point. 10,000,000 years on a concrete slab, a hard, unforgiving surface. 0.100000 years, with 1 hour a day in a dying earthscape. I barely recognize 0.100000 years of sickly green floors and cold steel doors that move for nothing. 0.100000 years of mopping floors or scrubbing toilets. 100,000 years being monitored by beings I cannot fully comprehend as their burning horror erupts in the back of my mind. 0.100. 1 life sentences. 0.1000 to go only. One small thing gives me comfort with 1,000 life sentences. At least it's a nice, a clean number. I hope I don't die too soon and ruin this nice, even lifetime, because the next one will be beep. Story 3. The rain hadn't stopped since Ethan arrived at Blackwater Fen. It wasn't the gentle, misty rain of his childhood memories visiting Gran. This was a cold, relentless downpour that turned the narrow lanes to sucking mud and painted the ancient, leaning oaks in slick, black bark. It drummed a hollow rhythm on the roof of his grandmother's cottage, a sound that seeped into his bones like the damp Gran was gone now, found peacefully in her rocking chair 3 weeks prior, clutching a small, crudely carved bone charm, a thing Ethan had always dismissed as an old woman's harmless superstition. He inherited the cottage, nestled deep within the isolated fen country, a place steeped in whispers and forgotten lore. Locals spoke of the old ways in hushed tones, of the bone tree and the guardians. Ethan, a pragmatic architect from the city, dismissed it all as quaint folklore. He'd come to clear the cottage, sell the land, and be done with this dripping, melancholic place. His cousin, Alma, met him at the door. Her face, usually warm, was pinched with worry. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain's roar, "you shouldn't have come. Not now. Not during the wedding." The wedding, Ethan scoffed, shaking water from his coat onto the worn flagstones. "It's just rain, Alma. Been raining for weeks, apparently. Look, I know Gran had her beliefs, but she's gone. Time to move on." Alma's eyes, the color of peat water, held a depth of fear that unsettled him. "It's not just rain, Ethan. It's the wedding. The time when the fen remembers, when the boundary thins, Gran, she kept the watch. She gestured towards a small, locked cabinet beside the cold hearth. Inside, dimly visible through the glass, lay more bone charms, bundles of dried, strange-smelling herbs, and a small, leather-bound book, brittle with age. Superstition, Ethan repeated, though the word felt hollow in the damp, heavy air. The cottage smelled old, not just of dust and damp, but of earth, deep earth, and something else, something vaguely sweet and rotten, like forgotten roots. I am clearing the place out. Getting it on the market, Alma grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You can tea, not yet. The watch, it needs to be maintained. Until the solstice. Gran, she knew the rituals, the appeasements. Appease what, Alma? Frustration sharpened his voice. Ghosts, bog monsters. This is the 21st century, the bone tree, Alma whispered, her gaze darting towards the window, where the black shapes of the trees writhed in the downpour, and what hangs from it, what grows from it. The guardian's errant ghosts, Ethan, they re-older, hungrier. The fen feeds them, or it feeds on us, Ethan pulled away. Enough. I am going to the village for supplies. Maybe some sense. He ignored Alma's pleading look. The way her knuckles whitened on the doorframe as he pulled on his sodden coat and stepped back into the deluge. The walk to the scattered hamlet called Blackwater Cross was a slog through clinging mud, and under a sky the color of lead. The few villagers he encountered, gaunt figures in oilskins, averted their eyes or made strange, warding gestures with their hands as he passed. Their whispers, snatched by the wind, sounded like outsider and too late, and the chillingly specific. He broke the watch at the Soul Pub, the Drowned Man. The atmosphere was thick with unease. The fire smoked miserably. Conversations died as he entered. The landlord, a man named Croker with eyes like flint, served him a pint of bitter in silence. Finally, as Ethan turned to leave, Croker spoke, his voice gravelly and low. You be Alma's city cousin, the one clearing old Maud's place. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Ethan replied, trying to sound casual. Croker leaned across the scarred bar. The smell of stale beer and damp, wool strong. You buried her proper, said the words. Kept the charms. We had a funeral home handle it. Gran wasn't religious. Croker's face drained of what little color it had. He made a sign. Ethan, didn't he recognize thumb and forefinger circled? The other fingers splayed like roots. Fen take you, boy, he breathed, not with malice, but with profound dread. You didn't watch. You didn't feed the roots. The wedding's here, and the tree is hungry before Ethan could retort. A bone-rattling thump shook the pub. Dust sifted from the rafters. Glasses rattled. Outside, the rain seemed to pause for a single, breathless second. Then, from the direction of the fen, came a sound that froze the blood in Ethan S. veins. Not a howl, not a scream, but a deep, guttural groan, like ancient wood splitting under immense pressure, mixed with a wet, sucking inhalation. It vibrated through the soles of his boots' silence, crashed back. Heavier than before. Every face in the pub was etched with raw terror. Croker just stared at Ethan, his expression bleak. Too late, hear it. That S the roots stirring. Hungry roots panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced Ethan S. skepticism. He fled the pub, stumbling back towards the cottage through the renewed downpour. The groaning sound, didn't he come again? But the fen felt different, watchful. The trees seemed to lean closer. Their branches, like skeletal fingers, dripping black water. The sweet-rotten smell was stronger now, carried on the wind, making him gag. He found Alma in the cottage, white as chalk, frantically trying to open the locked cabinet with a hairpin. "It's coming, Ethan," she gasped. "I can feel it in the ground. Vibrating. We need the book. Gran S. book. It has the binding words, the appeasement maybe, the key." Gran had always worn it on a chain around her neck. Ethan remembered the funeral director handing him a small box of her effects. He rummaged frantically in his suitcase, fingers closing over cold metal. He unlocked the cabinet. Alma snatched the leather-bound book, her hands trembling as she flipped through pages filled with spidery handwriting and unsettling diagrams of twisted trees and figures woven from mud and bone. "Here," she pointed, her voice cracking, "the appeasement of roots. But it needs." Her eyes widened in horror as she read further. "Blood, blood of the line. Offered willingly at the base of the tree before the wedding ends." She looked up, despair etched on her face. "It's too late for that. The wedding at S almost over." The rain, listen, Ethan realized the drumming on the roof was lessening. The downpour was slackening to a drizzle. Outside, the unnatural gloom was lifting slightly, revealing the bruised twilight sky. Another sound came then, not the deep groan, but a skittering, scratching noise, like dozens of hard, thin claws scraping against the cottage S stone foundation, then against the door, then against the window panes. Alma whimpered, backing towards the cold hearth. Roots, feeder roots. Ethan grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace. "Stay behind me." He moved towards the front window, heart hammering against his ribs. He peered out into the murky twilight. At first, he saw only the churned mud of the path, then movement, not from the trees, but from the ground itself. Thin, black fibrous tendrils, like desiccated veins, were pushing up through the mud. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They writhed blindly, probing the air, tapping against the stone walls, scratching the glass. They moved with a horrible, sinuous purpose, and they were converging on the cottage. "They smell us," Alma whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Smell the blood, the line." Gran was the last true guardian. Without the watch, without the offering, the scratching intensified, becoming a frenzied scrabbling. A thin black root tip, sharp as an awl, punched through the rotten wood of the doorframe near the bottom. Wriggling obscenely, another pierced the mud plaster between stones near the window. The sweet rotten smell flooded the cottage, thick enough to taste. "We have to run," Ethan yelled, brandishing the poker uselessly at the probing roots. "Run where?" Alma cried, her back pressed against the stones of the hearth. "The fen is it. It us awake." The roots weren't just probing anymore. They were pulling, with terrifying strength. They began to tear at the weak points of the old cottage. Stones groaned. Wood splintered. Mud began to ooze through the widening gaps. The floorboards near the door buckled upwards, pushed by a thick, coiled mass of glistening black roots. Surging from below Ethan swung the poker, connecting with a thick root. It felt like striking petrified wood. The root recoiled slightly, but didn't break. More surged forward to take its place, wrapping around the poker, wrenching it from his grasp with impossible force. Thin feeder roots lashed out like whips, wrapping around his ankle. They were cold, horribly strong, and covered in tiny, hair-like filaments that burrowed into his skin, seeking purchase, seeking in. A burning numbness spread up his leg. He screamed, kicking frantically, tearing his leg free, leaving shreds of denim and skin behind. He stumbled back, crashing into Alma. The cottage was coming apart. Roots snaked across the floor, climbed the walls, pushed through the ceiling, showering them with plaster and dust. The air was thick with the cloying stench, and the wet, tearing sounds of the fen consuming the structure. There, Alma shrieked, pointing towards the back door, miraculously still intact, though roots were already bulging the wood inwards. The old root cellar. Gran said it was warded once. They stumbled, fell, crawled through the chaos of snapping roots and falling debris. Alma fumbled with the heavy bolt on the cellar door, her fingers slick with mud and something darker. Ethan kicked at a root coiling around his other leg. The numbness was spreading. A chilling paralysis. The bolt screeched open. Alma yanked the door wide. Below was utter darkness, smelling of earth and mildew. She practically fell down the steep stone steps. Ethan followed, slamming the heavy oak door shut behind them, just as a thick root smashed through the space where his head had been. He threw the bolt, thick, ancient iron silence, utter, suffocating darkness, only the sound of their ragged breathing, and the relentless, wet thump, thump, thump of roots battering against the door. Above Ethan fumbled for his phone, activating the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a small, stone-walled cellar. Empty shelves lined one wall. In the center of the dirt floor stood a single, gnarled wooden post, carved with faded, intricate symbols, the same warding signs Alma had tried to make earlier. At its base, half buried, lay a small, stained cloth bundle. Alma crawled towards it, her eyes wide with a desperate hope. Gran's last appeasement, maybe. She unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay not herbs or charms, but small, yellowed bones, finger bones, several of them, tied together with blackened twine. "Oh, Gran," Alma sobbed, understanding dawning with horror. You paid. You paid with your own." She touched the bones. Reverently the pounding on the cellar door intensified. The heavy wood groaned. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The iron bolt began to bend. "It's not enough," Alma whispered, despair crushing her voice. "It was meant for before. It's too late. The tree, it wants more now. It wants continuity." Ethan leaned against the cold stone wall, the numbness creeping up his thigh, the burning cold spreading. He felt weak, drained. The flashlight beam trembled in his hand. He looked at Alma, her face pale and streaked with dirt and tears, clutching the pitiful bundle of finger bones. He looked at the ancient warding post, its symbols faint, its power clearly waning. The banging stopped. A terrifying silence descended, thick and heavy as the fen mud. Then a new sound, a slow, deliberate scraping against the cellar door. Not the frenzied pounding of roots, but something harder, sharper. Scratch, 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 like claws, like bone on wood. Alma's breath hitched. She stared at the door. Frozen, a low, guttural sound vibrated through the stones, not from above, but from beneath them. It was the same deep groan he'd heard in the village, but closer, much closer, and it wasn't just wood splitting. It was the sound of something vast and ancient shifting in the deep earth, disturbed from its ageless slumber, drawn by the scent of the bloodline left unguarded. The scratching on the door became more insistent. Tap, 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 like knuckles. Then a voice, dry, rasping, like roots dragging over stone, yet horribly familiar. Gran's voice, but distorted, stretched thin, filled with an unbearable hunger. "Alma Ethian," it whispered through the wood. "Open the door." Alma screamed, scrambling back until she hit the warding post. The bundle of finger bones fell from her grasp. Scattering in the dirt, the voice continued, dripping with a terrible, false sweetness. Come out, children, the roots are cold. Share the warmth of your blood feed. The tree become guardians. Ethan S. flashlight beam flickered, then died, plunging them into absolute darkness. The paralysis reached his chest, making breathing a struggle. The scratching became a rhythmic pounding again, but slower, more deliberate. The groaning beneath them rose in volume, a subterranean chorus of hunger in the suffocating blackness. Ethan understood. The folklore wasn't quaint. It was a desperate survival manual. The bone tree wasn't a myth. It was the Fen S heart, a monstrous entity woven from peat and time and sacrifice. The guardians weren't protectors. They were the chosen sacrifices, bound to the roots. Their life force slowly drained to appease the ancient hunger below. Gran hadn't just died. Her death, unprepared, unritualized, had broken the centuries-old covenant. The wedding wasn't just rain. It was the fen stirring. Its thirst unquenched the price for ignoring the warnings, for dismissing the old wisdom. Wasn't just death. It was assimilation, an eternity bound to the cold, dark roots, feeding the horror that had slept beneath their feet for millennia. The pounding on the door matched the slowing thud of his own heart. The scratching sounded like roots seeking purchase on bone alma. S. choked sobs were the only human sound left in the crushing dark. Above them, the scraping grew louder, more eager. Below, the groaning deepened, resonating through the stones, vibrating up through the soles of their feet. The sound of the fen, opening its maw the horror, hadn't just arrived. It had woken up, and it was very, very hungry. The watch was broken. The guardians were gone. Now, the fen would take new roots, and the wedding. Ethan realized with icy dread, as the first splinters of wood showered down from the buckling door, was only just beginning. Story 4. The cold seeped into Eris Thorne S. bones. The moment he turned the heavy, rusted key in the lock of Blackwood House, it wasn't just the damp November chill of the Vermont mountains. It was a deeper cold, a stillness that seemed to emanate from the weathered gray stones themselves. He inherited the place from a reclusive great uncle he barely remembered. A last, unexpected tether to a family history shrouded in silence. Eris, a meticulous archivist, accustomed to the controlled environment of university libraries, saw it as a project, a refuge from the noise of the city. He was wrong. The first few days were uneventful, filled with the practicalities of settling into a house that felt more like a mausoleum. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight filtering through grimy leaded windows. The air held the persistent scent of damp earth and old paper, undercut by something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood, forgotten in a forgotten corner. Eris dismissed it. As the decay of neglect then came the sounds, not loud, not intrusive, but profoundly wrong. Late at night, as wind moaned around the eaves, he'd hear a rhythmic thump, thump, thump deep within the walls. Not the settling of old timber, but something deliberate, ponderous, like the heartbeat of something impossibly large buried beneath the foundations. He'd lie rigid in the unfamiliar four-poster bed, the darkness pressing in, straining to hear it again, only to be met with a silence so complete it felt suffocating. Once, just before dawn, he swore he heard a low, guttural whisper emanating from the fireplace in the study, not words, but a sound that scraped against the mind, leaving a residue of primal dread. The cold spots intensified, standing in the grand, empty drawing room. He'd suddenly step into a pocket of air, so frigid his breath plumed visibly, while the rest of the room remained merely chilly. These patches seemed to move, lingering near doorways, or the foot of the staircase leading down to the cellar. Touching the stones within these zones felt like touching ice that had been dead for centuries. He bought thicker sweaters, stoked the ancient wood stove higher, but the cold came from within the house, not without subtle manifestations, bloomed like mold. Eris, a creature of habit, kept his few books meticulously aligned on the dusty shelves. He'd return to find one slightly askew, spine facing inward, his notes for cataloging the house as sparse contents, mostly heavy, dark furniture that seemed to absorb light, would develop faint, damp smudges, obscuring words. He found a single, perfect circle of frost on his bedroom window one morning. Despite the room being relatively warm, inside the circle, the glass was perfectly clear, showing the bleak landscape outside. But the frost clung stubbornly to the pane around it. The worst was the feeling of being watched. It wasn't paranoia. It was a physical sensation, a prickling on the back of his neck, a weight settling on his shoulders when he entered certain rooms, particularly the library, with its floor-to-ceiling shelves of mildewed, unreadable tomes. The air would thicken, becoming heavy and difficult to breathe. He'd whirl around, heart hammering, convinced he'd see something in the periphery of his vision, a deeper shadow, a flicker of movement where none could be. But there was only the oppressive stillness and the watchful emptiness. He tried logic, drafts, faulty wiring, causing infrasound, old pipes. He even researched local geology, wondering about underground water or shifting rock. Nothing explained the intentionality he felt. The slow, patient observation that seemed to be studying him. He began documenting the occurrences in his journal. His neat archivist-esque script becoming increasingly erratic as the entries grew more disturbing. October 27th. The whispering again from the study fireplace lasted perhaps 10 seconds. Sounded like stones grinding together deep underground. Felt nauseous afterward. Cold spot in the front hall was particularly intense today. Could see my breath for nearly 5 minutes after stepping out of it. November 3rd. Woke at 3:17 am. Certain something was standing beside the bed. Not a shape, just presence. Immense pressure. Couldn't he move? Couldn't he scream? Lasted maybe a minute. Felt like hours. Left to smell ozone and wet stone. November 10th. Found scratches on the inside of the cellar door. Deep gouges in the old wood. Parallel lines, like claws. Too big for any animal I know. Door was locked from the inside. I have the only key. The cellar. He avoided it. The heavy oak door at the end of the narrow, servants' stairs felt like a barrier. He instinctively didn't he want to cross. The air that seeped from beneath it was colder than the rest of the house, carrying that metallic earth smell at its strongest. The scratches changed that. Fear curdled into a desperate need to understand. To confront the source, he descended the creaking stairs. Flashlight beam cutting a feeble swat through the thick, cloying darkness. The cellar was smaller than he expected. Just rough stone walls and a packed earth floor. Empty, save for cobwebs thick as curtains and decades of undisturbed dust. And the holet was in the far corner, where the floor met the wall, roughly circular, about 3 feet wide, not dug. It looked worn, as if something had patiently abraded the earth and stone over eons. It descended into absolute blackness, no bottom visible. Standing near it, the cold was a physical blow, the smell of wet stone, and something ancient, like deep, stagnant water under miles of rock, was overpowering. The whispering seemed louder here, not in his ears, but vibrating in his skull, in his bones. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't he coming from the walls. It was coming from below. From the hole he stumbled back. Terror, finally overriding his archivist-esque compulsion. He slammed the cellar door, locking it, leaning against it, as if to hold something back. That night, the nightmares began. Visions of impossible geometries, of vast, lightless caverns stretching beneath the earth, of something vast and slumbering that wasn't tea, stone, or flesh, but something other. He wake gasping. the taste of dirt in his mouth. The thump, 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 echoing in the silence of his room he sought help. Driving the treacherous mountain roads to the nearest town, Hemlock Creek, the few locals he encountered became reticent, eyes sliding away when he mentioned Blackwood House. Only old Mrs. Gable, who ran the failing general store, spoke with a grim finality, her voice barely above a whisper. That place, it sits on something. Always has. My grandpappy said it were there, before the first settlers, before the Indians even. They knew better en to build on it. But your family, they were drawn to it. Said it whispered promises. Built right over the mouth. She wouldn't he elaborate on what the mouth was, shooing him out with a look of profound pity. You feel the cold. You hear the stones talk. Then it knows you, and it is hungry, always hungry. Dawn tea matter where you run. It is in the ground. It is in you now. Her words echoed in his mind as he drove back. Escape felt laughable. The whispering wasn't tea just in the house. It followed him, sitting in his parked car at the edge of his property, miles from the cellar. He heard it, a faint, gritty susurration beneath the engine's idle. The cold spot seemed to linger around him, even outside. The fear wasn't he just of the entity. It was becoming a part of him, a constant, gnawing presence. The manifestations escalated, shedding all pretense of subtlety. Objects flew off shelves when he entered a room. The frost patterns on the windows became intricate, alien sigils that seemed to shift when not directly observed. One morning, he found a perfect, bloody handprint on the cold glass of his bedroom window inside. It was too large, the fingers too long and jointed wrong. The metallic smell became a constant companion, thick enough to taste the final descent. Began on a night when the wind screamed like damned souls. The thump, thump, thump wasn't he just audible. He could feel it vibrating the floorboards beneath his feet, resonating in his chest cavity. The whispering coalesced into a single, undeniable command, not in any language, but a psychic imperative that bypassed his ears and bored directly into his mind. Come below. Resistance was futile. It wasn't he just fear compelling him. It was a terrible, gravitational pull. He felt detached, moving like a sleepwalker. He took the cellar key. The scratches on the door seemed deeper, fresher. The cold radiating from the wood burned his hand. He unlocked it. The darkness within felt alive, thick, and breathing he descended. The flashlight beam seemed weaker, devoured by the hungry black. The whispering was a chorus now, layered voices of stone and time and hunger. The thump, thump, thump was a physical pressure, shaking dust from the ceiling. He stood before the hole. The blackness wasn't empty. It pulsed. It breathed. It radiated an ancient, incomprehensible malice that made his mind shrivel. This wasn't a hole. It was a throat he understood now. Blackwood House wasn't just built over something. It was built for something. A beacon, a trap, a feeding station. The entity wasn't a ghost. It was older than mountains, vaster than oceans. A consciousness that existed in dimensions beyond human comprehension, anchored to this spot. It wasn't malevolent in the human sense. It simply was, and its existence consumed. His uncle hadn't just lived here. He had been a custodian, or perhaps a sacrifice. The hunger wasn't for flesh, but for awareness, for the terrified spark of a soul. It fed on the dread, the slow realization, the crushing weight of inevitable doom as he stared into the pulsating abyss. The flashlight finally died. Absolute darkness swallowed him, but he could still see the hole. It glowed with a sickly, internal phosphorescence, not light, but the negation of it. Shapes writhed in its depths, geometries that hurt his eyes and mind, suggesting impossible limbs, cavernous maws, and eyes like dying stars. The whispering stopped. The thumping stopped. In the sudden, absolute silence, a single, clear thought formed in his mind, not his own, but placed there with chilling intimacy. You are home. He tried to scream, but his throat was frozen. He tried to run, but his legs were stone. The cold wasn't external anymore. It was in him, spreading from his core, turning his blood to sludge. The house groaned around him, the very stones shifting, settling, not with age, but with satisfaction. He wasn't just trapped within the house. He was bound to the land, to the entity slumbering beneath it. Escape was a childish fantasy. There was no outside anymore. The entire mountain, the valley, perhaps the world itself, felt like a thin crust over the immensity below. Eris Thorne didn't jump. He didn't need to. Standing at the edge of the impossible hole, feeling the ancient, ravenous consciousness turn its full, terrible attention upon him. He knew, with absolute, soul-crushing certainty, that he would go down into the dark. Not today, perhaps, but soon. The house would ensure it. The cold would guide him. The whispers would soothe him. The thumping was a lullaby for the damned. He was merely keeping the place warm, keeping the ancient hunger company, until it was time for the below to claim what had always belonged to it. He turned and walked slowly back up the cellar stairs, leaving the door open behind him. The cold followed. The whispering resumed, softer now, almost affectionate. He sat in the decaying armchair in the drawing room, staring at the frost patterns blooming like alien flowers on the window pane. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the silence was deeper. He could feel the house breathing around him. A vast, stony lung, and beneath his feet, deep in the impossible dark, something vast and patient and unspeakably old waited. Its slow, subterranean heartbeat now synchronized with the terrified pulse in his own throat. Thump, thump, thump. The hole was open, and it was waiting. Story 5. The wind howled across the white desert like a chorus of the damned. Station Erebus, a cluster of prefabricated modules huddled against the relentless Antarctic winter, felt less like a scientific outpost and more like a tomb clinging to the edge of oblivion. Dr. Aris Thorne, lead paleoclimatologist, traced the condensation freezing on the thick window pane. Outside, the world was reduced to shades of bruised gray and blinding white, a monochrome purgatory under a perpetually twilight sky. He felt the familiar, gnawing insignificance here, more than anywhere else on Earth. Humanity's frantic existence seemed to flicker against the billion-year slumber of the ice. Dr. Thorne, we've hit something. Ice Core 7, Lena Petrova, S voice crackled over the intercom. Tight, with something beyond the usual fatigue, excitement, or the first tremor of unease, Thorne suited up. The ritual of zippers, seals, and layers, feeling suddenly inadequate. The drill site was a kilometer from the main station, accessible only through a pressurized tunnel, vibrating with the groan of ancient ice settling. Inside the drilling module, the air tasted metallic, thick with the smell of hydraulic fluid and ozone. Petrova, her face pale beneath the harsh work lights, pointed to the core sample, extruding from the massive drill-headed Wasson T ice, not entirely embedded deep within the translucent blue matrix. Like a cancerous jewel, was a section of something else. It was blacker than the void between stars, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. Its surface Wasson T smooth. It possessed a subtle, impossible geometry, angles that seemed to shift when Thorne tried to focus, suggesting depths that defied Euclidean space. It felt warm, warmer than the ice around it should ever be at this depth. It's wrong, Petrova whispered, her breath frosting the visor of her helmet. The core scanner went haywire. Readings off the charts. Not just composition, but temporal signatures, spatial distortions. The instruments can't make sense of it. Thorne leaned closer, ignoring the sudden thrumming in his ears. He touched the core tube near the anomaly. A jolt, not electric, but psychic, slammed into him. A fleeting image. Titanic structures, cyclopean and non-Euclidean, silhouetted against a swirling nebula of impossible colors. Stars that weren't stars, burning with cold, silent fire, a sense of crushing age, vast beyond comprehension, dwarfing the entire history of Earth into a meaningless footnote, and beneath it all, a profound, chilling indifference, not malice, but the utter disregard a mountain has for the ant crawling upon it. He jerked his hand back, gasping. Petrova stared at him, wide-eyed. You felt it too, over the next agonizingly slow days. The perpetual twilight made time meaningless. They extracted the core section containing the anomaly. They called it the shard. Analysis was futile. X-rays diffracted into nonsensical patterns. Spectral analysis returned gibberish. Attempts to take a microscopic sample caused the diamond-tipped drill bit to shatter. And the technician, Dr. Finn, reported a splitting headache and nausea that lingered for hours. He also swore the shard pulsed with a faint, internal light. When no one was looking directly at it, the psychological toll began immediately. Sleep became a battleground. Vivid, terrifying dreams plagued them all. Falling through infinite voids filled with whispering geometric shapes. The sensation of being watched by something vast and incomprehensible, just beyond the veil of perception. Finn started seeing impossible angles in the corners of the lab. Fleeting shadows moving at impossible speeds. Petrova became hyper-vigilant, jumping at every creak of the station, convinced something was breathing just outside the pressurized wall's thorn, felt the most profound shift. His life's work, understanding Earth's climate history, suddenly felt like studying the dust motes dancing in a beam of light, while ignoring the sun going supernova outside. The shard wasn't just an object, it was a keyhole, a glimpse into a cosmos so vast, so ancient, and so utterly indifferent to life that it rendered humanity cosmically irrelevant. The comforting illusion of significance, of purpose, dissolved like smoke one night. During a particularly violent storm that shook the station like a terrier with a rat. The power flickered. In the brief, terrifying darkness, Thorne saw it, not with his eyes, but projected onto the inside of his skull. The city from his fleeting touch, not a ruin, but a living metropolis of impossible angles and shifting light, inhabited by things, shapes that defied description, entities composed of geometry and shadow, moving through dimensions perpendicular to our own. They weren't hostile, they simply were, and their awareness brushed against his mind like a glacier scraping bedrock immense, cold, and utterly oblivious to the microscopic life. Clinging to its surface, he woke screaming, his pillow soaked with sweat. and something else, a thin, viscous fluid that smelled of ozone and decay, leaking from his tear ducts. Petrova found him huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth, muttering about the angles. And the light that isn't light, we have to destroy it. Petrova pleaded the next morning, her eyes hollow. It's poisoning us. Poisoning our minds, Finn. His hands trembling as he tried to recalibrate a sensor, shook his head violently. Destroy it. Are you mad? It's its knowledge. The ultimate knowledge. Don't you see? We found proof. Proof that we're not alone. That the universe is alive. Thorn's voice was a rasp. No, Finn. Not alive as we understand. Those things, they don't care. We are less than bacteria to them. The shard, it's not a message. It's debris. Cosmic flotsam. And it's showing us our true place. Know where the argument escalated, fueled by sleep deprivation, and the shard's insidious psychic pressure. Finn became obsessed, spending hours staring at the shard, documenting his increasingly fragmented thoughts in a journal filled with feverish sketches of non-Euclidean shapes and equations that dissolved into madness. He wrote of the singers in the void, entities whose mere existence warped space-time, whose thoughts were gravitational tides that could snuff out stars. He claimed he could hear them, a faint, discordant hum resonating through the ice. Through his bones then, Finn vanished. They found his journal open on his desk. The final entry, a frantic scrawl. IT knows, WERE looking. The eye opens the silence was the gift. We broke the silence. They are coming through the angles. The shard is the door. The shard is the key. The shard is the page ended in a jagged tear, and a single, perfect drop of that same viscous, ozone-smelling fluidae search of the station revealed nothing, until they checked the airlock logs. Finn had suited up during the storm's peak, and exited into the -70 hellscape. His transponder signal vanished 100 meters from the station, swallowed by the blizzard. His suit camera feed, recovered later, showed only swirling snow until the last few seconds. The image flickered, distorted, for a single, stomach-churning frame. The snow wasn't snow. It was a vast, geometric latticework of impossible black stone, stretching into infinity, and silhouetted against it, impossibly large, was a shape that made Thorn's mind recoil, a shifting mass of angles and darkness that seemed to simultaneously occupy the foreground and the infinite distance. Then static the storm finally broke, revealing a landscape scoured clean. No sign of Finn, no tracks leading away. It was as if the ice itself had swallowed him whole. Thorn and Petrova knew they couldn't stay. They couldn't take the shard. Corporate command. Light years away, in terms of comprehension, demanded samples, demanded explanations. They spoke of unprecedented discovery and Nobel potential, their voices tinny and absurd over the satellite link. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. The extraction team arrived 2 weeks later. Thorne and Petrova were shadows of their former selves. Petrova rarely spoke, flinching at sudden movements, her eyes perpetually scanning the corners of rooms. Thorne felt hollowed out, the weight of cosmic indifference, a constant pressure on his soul. He saw the universe differently now. The stars weren't points of light. They were the indifferent eyes of leviathans, or perhaps merely the scattered embers of processes too vast to fathom. The comforting darkness of night felt like the true face of reality. The daylight, a temporary, fragile illusion they handed over their data, their logs, their sanitized reports. They spoke of a tragic accident, of unstable ice, of Finn's mental breakdown. They lied with the ease of those who have seen the abyss and know that truth is a luxury they can no longer afford. They said nothing of the shard's true nature, of the city in the void, of the singers, of the thing in the storm. They sealed the core sample containing the shard in a reinforced titanium case, marked it as deep ice, anomaly high rad hazard, and watched as it was loaded onto the heavy lift helicopter as the chopper lifted off, its rotors beating against the vast silence. Thorne looked up. The sky was clear, brutally cold, the stars diamond hard. Didn't he see beauty? He saw the architecture of an uncaring universe. He saw the infinite void where humanity's hopes, fears, and entire history were less than a sigh. He saw the place where Finn had gone, not to die, but to be processed, observed, or simply ignored, like dust brushed from a cosmic shelf. Petrova stood beside him, silent tears freezing on her cheeks. "It's still out there," she whispered, not meaning the shard on the helicopter. "It's always been out there. We just didn't know to look into the angles." Thorne nodded. He felt no relief at leaving. He carried the knowledge within him now. A cold, heavy stone in the pit of his being. The shard was gone, but the door it represented was still open. A crack in reality. The singers in the void hadn't noticed humanity before. Now, perhaps, they had registered a faint, insignificant vibration. A microbe twitching on a slide. He looked at the pristine white expanse, stretching to the horizon and beyond. It wasn't empty. It was full of the unseen, the unthinkable. The universe wasn't hostile. It was infinitely worse. It was indifferent, and in that vast, silent indifference, Thorne understood the true horror. Humanity was alone, not in the sense of being unique, but in the sense of being utterly, cosmically irrelevant, a fleeting thought in the mind of something too vast to comprehend them, lost in the crushing silence between the stars. The wind picked up again, carrying the sound of the ice groaning, a sound that now echoed the silent scream trapped forever in Eris Thorn as soul. The helicopter became a speck, then vanished. Below, the ice held its ancient secrets, and above, the indifferent stars burned on. The revelation wasn't liberation. It was a life sentence. They had learned the universe's secret. Humanity was nothing, and the knowledge was a poison with no antidote. A chilling wind that would follow them back into the world of light. A constant reminder of the infinite, uncaring dark. The sun, when it finally peaked above the horizon weeks later, didn't feel like warmth. It felt like the glare of an indifferent eye, illuminating a stage far too vast for the insignificant players upon it. The silence, he realized, had indeed been the gift, and they had shattered it forever. Story 6. The wind screamed like a dying thing across the endless white expanse. Polaris Station, a cluster of prefabricated modules huddled against the Antarctic desolation, felt less like a scientific outpost and more like a tomb clinging to the edge of oblivion. Inside Lab Gamma, Dr. Eris Thorn stared at the core sample displayed on the high-resolution monitor. The rhythmic beep of life support systems, the only sound against the silence, pressing in from the frozen wastes beyond the reinforced walls. The ice core, extracted from over 3 kilometers down, held a prize that had electrified the small team. A perfectly smooth, obsidian-black sphere, barely the size of a grapefruit, embedded within glacial ice, dated to a time before complex life crawled onto land. It shouldn't be possible, Lena Petrov murmured, her breath fogging the chilled observation window, separating them from the artifact in the sterile containment chamber. The geologist traced the sphere-S outline on the glass with a gloved finger. No tool marks, no imperfections. Isotopic decay suggests it predates the solar system itself. By billions of years, Commander Briggs, a block of pragmatic muscle in his thermal gear, shifted uncomfortably. Foreign object. Could be meteoritic debris compressed under pressurely vents. The Station S biologist, usually vibrant with youthful enthusiasm, looked pale. It's humming. Can you feel it? Not through the air, in your bones. He rubbed his temples. The dreams started last night. Falling forever into something cold and dark, that Watch's Thorn ignored them. His focus locked on the sphere. Rationality was his armor. He spent his life charting the indifferent majesty of nebulae and pulsars. finding solace in the predictable laws of physics. This sphere was an insult to that order. Initial scans showed nothing, no radiation, no atomic structure their instruments could resolve. It absorbed light completely, a hole punched in reality. Then, yesterday, the passive sensors picked it up, a signal, not electromagnetic, but something else, a vibration that resonated through the very bedrock beneath the station. It was complex, layered, a symphony of impossible geometries translated into sound that scraped against the mind thorn, had isolated the signal, fed it through the station's most powerful decryption algorithms. The results flickered on his secondary monitor, a cascading torrent of non-Euclidean shapes, shifting fractals that hinted at dimensions beyond 3, interspersed with bursts of static that sounded disturbingly like whispers, not words, but intent, a cold, vast, utterly alien intent. He initiated projection sequence, Gamma. "This is it," Thorne announced, his voice tight. "We're going to feed a low-energy laser pulse back into the sphere, modulated with the dominant frequency we decoded." A handshake Briggs frowned. "Protocols forbid active engagement with unknown alien artifacts. Doctor protocols," Thorne snapped, eyes fever-bright, "were written by bureaucrats terrified of the dark." "This is knowledge, Commander. Pure, ancient knowledge. It could rewrite physics, explain the universe's origins." The humming Illy mentioned had become a constant, low thrum in Thorne's own skull, a siren's song drowning out caution. The sphere promised answers. A glimpse behind the cosmic curtain. Lena placed a hand on Thorne's arm. "Eris, Illy's not the only one having nightmares. I see angles, wrong angles, in the corners of my vision, like the station walls are folding." Her voice trembled. Thorne shook her off. "Stress, isolation, we reclose." He entered the final command. The laser array within the containment chamber hummed to life, casting stark, clinical light. A thin, coherent beam lanced out, striking the sphere's perfect surface. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the sphere didn't reflect the light. It drank it. The blackness deepened, becoming impossibly profound. A miniature Abyssthus signal monitor exploded into frenzied activity. The geometric patterns collapsed into chaotic static, then resolved into something new. Not shapes, perspectives. It was a view, not from a camera, but from a vantage point outside space-time. Thorne gasped, his rational mind buckling. He saw Polaris Station, a pathetic cluster of boxes, clinging to a speck of ice on a frozen rock. He saw Earth, a pale blue dot swallowed by the immensity of space. He saw the solar system, then the Milky Way, receding faster and faster into a tapestry of galaxies. Filaments of light stretching into a cosmic web of terrifying scale, and woven through that web, permeating the void between galaxies, were things. Entities defied description. They were vast, not in size, but in conception. They existed in dimensions perpendicular to human understanding. Their forms shifting kaleidoscopes of impossible physics, fractal limbs, branching into non-space, sensory organs that perceived gravity as flavor and time as texture. They moved through the cosmos not with ships, but by unfolding sections of reality, stepping through the folds like a hand dipping into a pond. And they were utterly, devastatingly indifferent. Humanity wasn't insignificant. It was invisible, less than microbes on a grain of sand, adrift in an endless desert. The projection wasn't just visual. It flooded Thorne's senses. He felt the crushing vacuum between galaxies, the agonizingly slow death of stars, the birth cries of nebulae that meant nothing. He tasted the metallic tang of cosmic radiation and the chilling sweetness of absolute zero. He heard the silent scream of entropy, the relentless grinding down of all things towards heat death, and underlying it all, a psychic resonance, the cold hum of the entity's passage, not malevolence, but the profound, terrifying indifference of mountains to the ants crawling on them. Turn it off. Lena screamed, clawing at her eyes. She was on the floor, curled into a fetal position. Make it stop. It's looking at us. Through time, through the ice, Illy was worse. He stood rigid, eyes wide and unseeing, a thin line of drool tracing his chin. A low, guttural moan escaped his lips, a sound devoid of humanity. The angles they inside, he gargled. It knows my name from before I was born, Briggs, trained for combat, not cosmic horror, fumbled for the emergency cutoff. His hand shook violently. He saw it too, not the full projection, but flickers at the edge of his vision. Impossible geometries warping the lab walls, glimpses of vast, membranous structures drifting past unseen stars. A sense of being observed by something that registered his existence only as a faint thermal anomaly on a planet due for geological recycling in a cosmic blinkthorn. Didn't he move? He was paralyzed, not by fear, but by revelation. His life's work, his faith in knowledge, his very sense of self, dissolved like sugar in acid. He understood now. The sphere wasn't a beacon. It was a lens, a tiny, accidental pinhole that allowed a glimpse into the true, horrifying scale and nature of existence. The signal wasn't a message. It was the ambient noise of those entities moving through the substrate of reality, a byproduct of their incomprehensible existence. Finding it wasn't discovery, it was trespassing, peeking through a keyhole into a room where things that dwarfed gods went about their unfathomable business with a surge of primal terror. Briggs slammed the emergency shutdown. The laser cut off. The monitors went dark. The oppressive psychic weight lessened, but didn't vanish. It lingered, a greasy film on their minds, a constant awareness of the abyss just outside the fragile bubble of their perception. The containment chamber was empty. The obsidian sphere was gone, not destroyed, retrieved. In the space where it had rested, the air shimmered with residual wrongness, a localized distortion that made the eyes water. A single, perfect circle of ice remained, impossibly smooth. Impossibly cold silence descended, thick and suffocating. Lena rocked back and forth, whispering incoherently about angles and eyes. Ellie stood frozen, a statue of madness, staring at the empty space where the sphere had been. Tears carving icy tracks down his cheeks. Briggs leaned against the console, breathing raggedly, his face ashen. The unshakable soldier, confronted by something no weapon could touch, Thorn slowly turned from the darkened screens. His eyes, once sharp and inquisitive, were hollow. The vibrant astrophysicist was gone. In his place stood a ghost, haunted by an understanding too vast to bear. He looked at his colleagues, at the sterile lab, at the reinforced window showing the endless, indifferent white. "We were wrong," he whispered, the sound raw, stripped of all conviction, so terribly wrong. The universe isn't hostile. Hostility implies awareness, implies care. He let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, more a dry rattle. It's empty and full of them. Things so vast, so alien, that our entire history, our wars, our loves, our art is less than a single-celled organism in an ocean. We aren't alone. We irrelevant. Dust motes dancing in a beam of light. Unaware of the cathedral collapsing around us, he walked towards the exit. Movements stiff, robotic. The lens is closed, but the door. He paused, looking back at the shimmering distortion in the containment chamber. A scar on reality. The door was opened, just for a moment, and something looked back. He touched his temple, a gesture of profound weariness. It's still looking, from the corners, from the dark between the stars. It saw us. It knows we peeked, and it doesn't care until it does. Thorn left the lab. Lena S. whimpers, and Ellie S. vacant stare filled the space he left behind. Briggs remained, staring at the perfect circle of ice. It was colder than the surrounding ice, cold enough to burn. He knew, with a certainty that settled into his marrow like permafrost, that Thorn was right. The horror wasn't over. It had just begun. The vast, indifferent cosmos had brushed against their tiny world, leaving behind not monsters, but a chilling, unshakable truth. Humanity huddled on a fragile rock, screaming into an abyss that neither heard nor cared, while things beyond comprehension moved in the dark spaces between the light. The sphere was gone, but the knowledge remained. A terminal cancer in their minds. They were forever changed, forever small, forever aware of the crushing, silent immensity pressing in from all sides, waiting. The hum in their bones was the only sound in the universe that mattered now, the sound of the abyss breathing.